Well, a warm welcome to this Horizon Scan session on neural networks. My name is Stefan Mergenthaler. I'm head of strategic intelligence at the World Economic Forum, and it's my great pleasure to introduce and facilitate this Horizon Scan session with Professor Henry Markram. Not just because Henry and his colleagues are long-standing partners in our work at the World Economic Forum, but also because his seminal work that he will talk about the digital brain, in some ways is also an inspiration for us to build the digital brain of the World Economic Forum with what we do on an ongoing basis, working with universities, think tanks, research institutions, including, of course, Frontiers, the publishing house that you founded, on mapping the interconnections around issues from education to aging and longevity, to gender inequality, or indeed corporate governance, because these are interconnected systems and we need to understand them as such. And so this is an ongoing effort we're undertaking across hundreds of topics. But at these opportunities, like Davos, where we have an assembly of some of the big thinkers, we also ask them to map out what they see as the most important issues on the horizon. And I'm very pleased we have Henry to unpack his seminal work on the digital brain. So without further ado, we'll have opportunities for interaction in a moment, but I'll hand over to you, Henry, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Stefan. So I'm going to tell you about two things today. One, that it is possible to build a computer model of the brain. And the second is that it's now starting to be possible to teach this digital brain on the journey towards AGI. So this project started 20 years ago. It's a Swiss federal funded project with about 300 million in funding. It has involved 1,100 scientists and engineers over this period of 20 years. It needed a huge supercomputers to start. When we started back in 2005, we had to have one of the computers that we bought was about 8 times bigger than the current supercomputers were in Switzerland. The only supercomputers that could take on this challenge, which I'll tell you about, was the IBM Blue Gene supercomputer, and that's why we called the project the Blue Brain Project. So the mission that we were given was go and work out how to build the brain. We started with a mouse brain because the mouse brain is what most neuroscientists in the world work on. There's about 100,000 neuroscientists publishing an enormous amount about the brain. And most people will tell you we don't know much about the brain. We know an enormous amount about the brain. We actually know more than we know about the brain. So we do need to use AI to help us understand the brain. So what is a digital brain? Well, a digital brain is a computer model of the brain. It is a replica of the brain. It copies the shape, the dimensions, and the behavior of the synapses, the neurons, the brain circuits, the brain regions, the whole brain. The connectivity between every neuron, what we call the connectome between different types of neurons. There are many different types of neurons, so you have to recreate all the different types of neurons in all the different brain regions. This is an enormous task, and as I said, there's an enormous amount of data out there. So we use artificial intelligence to read hundreds of thousands of papers, and we go to databases where they've scanned the brain or measured certain aspects of the brain, and we draw in that and we map this into knowledge graphs, register them in atlases, so that we can actually use that data in algorithms in order to be able to recreate each and every neuron as accurately as it occurs in the real brain. Of course, it's not a copy of a particular brain, but it is representative of the brain. So this involves a vast amount of software. It's a huge ecosystem. We produced over these 20 years 18 million lines of code. This is code that has all the equations, the functions, algorithms, agents, the way we see today agentic AI. This is stuff we've been building, agents that build different neurons or connect different neurons. So we built this huge ecosystem of software to be able to build this brain. But to unpack this, it actually all collapses down into 5 steps to build the brain. The first step is you just fill the brain with neurons, just as dots. They get different colors because they have a different identity. They have a different type and name in terms of their shape or in terms of the way that they behave. There are about 600 different brain regions. In the mouse brain, there's about 70 million neurons that we need to recreate in digital form. We don't work on the human brain, but the human brain is about 1,000 times more. So you'd need much bigger computing to be able to do that. The next step, once you've got your neurons in place, is you have to grow what's called the dendrites. The dendrites are the branches that come out of every neuron, and every type of neuron has different branches. These branches are like antennas. The neurons extend the antennas so that they can receive information from the rest of other neurons from the parts of the brain. It is now mathematically possible, and this is a problem we solved after nearly 50 years of research, how to copy and recreate mathematically the branches of any neuron. They can now be recreated. The next step is you have to grow what's called the axons. The axons are the branches the neuron extends to send information to the other neurons. If you look at this, you have to grow in a computer 70,000 kilometers of axons, because that's what they do to reach out and touch every other neuron that they need to connect with. It's actually shocking the amount of axons that in your brain. If you unwrapped your brain, you could lasso the moon a couple of times with your axons. Now that you have axons and dendrites, the next step is you connect them and you find out where to create the synapses. There's lots of rules to these, and it doesn't mean every time they touch they form synapses, and we apply these rules and you get out a massive graph. So your brain is effectively a knowledge graph of 100 billion rows and 100 billion columns. But every node is actually a little supercomputer. The neuron is like a little supercomputer. And the last step is you switch it on. These are mathematical models that recreate the behavior of every neuron. And every neuron has every type of neuron has a slightly different way of behaving. It's got different electrical properties. What you're seeing here is electrical generation. Your brain is an electrical generator. Every neuron is generating electricity, but they generate them in different ways. So we can now recreate all the different electrical behaviors of all the different cells in the brain and capture it even at the whole brain level. Now, this sounds maybe simple, maybe complex. A lot of people say the brain is too complicated, we can't build it. This is not true. You can build it. We've got a framework to even add molecules. We haven't yet done that. We have done that for brain metabolism. We recreated the entire metabolic system with 66,000 different metabolic interactions between molecules. But at this level, at the cellular level, you can build the brain. You can build any brain. So how do we make this available now? So this project ended in December, last month, after 20 years, and we're very grateful that we had this opportunity to spend this 300 million and these amazing amount of scientists and engineers that were involved in creating this. But now we wanted to release this. So we opened this by creating a foundation, a non-profit foundation, which is called the Open Brain Institute, which is now going to become a playground, not for us to build brains, a fly brain, a lizard brain, a bird brain, maybe even, if there's more resources, a human brain. But it's a playground for you to be able to build brains. It's not just ours. So we've abstracted all of this software to make this possible for you to be able to build a brain. And you to get a virtual laboratory, you don't have to believe us that it's possible to build a brain. You can go and start building your neurons, your circuits. We're not going to let you immediately try to build a whole brain, because you will have to fork out maybe $500,000 of cloud computing to do it. So we don't want you to waste your money, but you will grow slowly into being able to build whatever brain tissue that you want. We have the algorithms to do that. But what's more is you can either manually go through an atlas, and I'm not going to play it because it skims over it too quickly, but you can either go into a brain atlas and just click on the areas you want to build, and then build them and simulate them and do all kinds of experiments on them, like a virtual piece of tissue, or you can ask an AI to help you. This AI is like chat, but on top of the 18 million lines of software code. It can execute the functions, it knows about the functions, it can call up any one of the 70 million neurons that there are in this case. You can just ask it to add more synapses, to stimulate the neuron in a different way. You can say, I don't believe this behavior, show me the code. It can show you the code. You can say, what is the equation behind it? And it will show you the equation. So you can not only use this for experimenting with the brain, but education, teaching. You can now, someone sitting in Africa can go in here and they can learn about neuroscience. They can explore the whole brain, every area of the brain, and explore what it is that the brain is doing. So this is a platform that allows now others to be able to benefit from the data. It's 2 petabytes of data, models, and software. You can inject your hypothesis. You say, well, you know, in autism, I think that this neuron there's more of this type of connections. And then you can try out to see whether that goes. So you can do your virtual prototyping of a particular disease. Lots of competition with the noise. But now that you have this playground, because we're at the World Economic Forum and every second billboard is about AI, what does it mean for AI? Well, we anticipated about 5 years ago that this moment will come when everybody will be able to build brain tissue. Small circuits, large circuits, different types of brains. We anticipated this, and so we launched a company called Innate, which set off with a mission to understand the code. What's the language of neurons when they talk to each other? I'm not going to talk much about that, but the second mission was, how does the brain learn? If we can solve how the brain learns, then we can start teaching the digital brain to solve anything, any type of task. So we adopt a very natural approach, because you can take this like a virtual brain. And it's rather the approach we take in teaching is different from the way that it's been done today in AI, which is teach it more like a child. Teach it about experiences. Let it interact with the world. Let it have agency. Let it be able to adjust, learn the physics of the world. We can think of today's journey, humanity's journey in AGI, as we're being about a third of the way. We know how to capture all the world's humanity's knowledge, serve it in any language, in any style, package it into agents and functions. But can it do this? Can it fly like a bird and catch an insect mid-air in a gust of wind? No. In fact, this is an AI-generated image. But the AI does not know anything about the physics. It cannot do this. It can only recreate the image of this. So that's what we call physics AI. You have to be able to interact with the world. And there are many aspects. I mean, this bird, to be able to do this, it not only has to have active perception in real time, acute, it has to have prediction, forecast, where's the fly going to be? It has to be able to make decisions on the fly. It has to have strategy. It has to recall memories from the past. It may be genetic. It may be learned. It has to have a goal. It has to have, its babies are waiting because it needs food. There's a lot of other factors in here that are way beyond the kind of AI. There's no AI that can do this today. And we think that it's only this architecture of the brain that can give you this interactivity. So we decided that the first step, and we've just taken this step very recently, so this is a horizon scan. It's about what's happening right now. Okay, it's not about... So I'm going to just show you a glimpse at the very, very first steps of teaching these brains. We took them for a test drive. What can they learn? Can they learn physics? The equations of motion. So OpenAI, as some of you may know, developed what's called a gym. And the gym has toy-like, and I'll show you, the toy-like games. But in order to solve them, you really have to understand physics and use it to make predictions. And these models that I'm going to show you, they require today very large, deep reinforcement learning models to solve. And so we said, let's take this for a test drive and see how can we teach the brain to do these physics games. So for example, this is an acrobat which has to find a way to wiggle its way and touch the line. It looks like a toy, but it's not an easy task for this little thing to find a way to wiggle up here. The top is before it can solve anything. It's just random. Here it's like taking a pole on your hand, and you have to try and keep that pole balanced, like in the circus. Here it's a bit harder because there's two poles on top of each other and you've got to balance two poles. Now, I don't even think most humans can do that, except like, maybe the circus people can. And here you have the car has to find out how much acceleration does it need to get to the top of this hill. It's a very difficult task. It takes anticipation. You've got to predict. You've got to work out how do you accelerate to get to the top of this to the hill. And here there's like a little stick that has to find a way, how does it move across this checkerboard? It's also quite a challenging task. Right now it's just random movements. And here there's a little moon landing launcher, and it gets a random trajectory at the beginning because of whatever is happening in the atmosphere, and it has to land here. Here, this is solved by 1 and 2 neurons. The deep reinforcement learning needed 100,000, sometimes 100 million neurons to learn in the classical way. The biological neurons, only 1 or 2 of them is needed to do this. That means that the biological approach to learning will collapse this energy dilemma that we have in AI today, potentially by several orders of magnitude. We're not talking 10% here or 50%. We're talking potentially 1,000,000 times less energy to solve physics interaction tasks. So this is solved by innate, and we can now look at the horizon as to what can happen with this kind of technology. So because you can have low power, you'll be able to have intelligent systems at the edge, in your phone, in the refrigerator, the doorbell, the way that some of the companies create these edge AI. But you'll also be able to have very large and very intelligent systems in the cloud and be able to do even more. You know, when things get easier, it doesn't mean you do less. It means you do more. So you'll be able to start doing, once you can do physics AI, you will have a much deeper experience in virtual reality. I don't know if many of you have tried the village collaboration, right? And these agents, the avatars that are like this, that's because they do not have physics. They haven't embodied the environment. They don't know how to physically interact in real time with the environment. With this kind of technology, you'll be able to create very realistic virtual reality environments that understand physics. So with that, I just want to emphasize again, it is indeed possible. If that's what's possible with 1 or 2 neurons, you can only imagine what's going to be possible with these many neurons and with the whole brain. And I leave it over to questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating, Henry. I'm sure there's many questions, so we'll try to be fast. We'll take maybe a collection.
Thank you very much. I'd be really fascinated. It was a great talk. I'd be really fascinated to understand what you have learnt maybe about the biological brain in terms of how good or well evolved it is, and maybe as a second part to that, what's maybe the effect of modern technology, AI, and social media on the modern brain?
So there are 2 very important principles about the brain that we find are absolutely key to intelligence. The first is something that almost everybody tries to run away from, and that is the complexity of every neuron. It's actually the diversity of every neuron. There's no neuron that is the same, exactly the same. They're all slightly different. So when you look at any one cell type, you actually have a cloud-like structure. This is very important. The second thing that we've seen is very important to be able to, if we don't get it right, we cannot copy what happens in the lab. And that is the precise connections between one type of neuron and another type of neuron. Those are extremely important variables that allow the brain to work the way we've seen it work in the lab. So those are 2 areas. There are many others related to how the brain is computing and what kind of information they are creating and gathering and what decisions they're making. And they're very exciting. And if I come back next year, I'll tell you about them.
Yossi Vardi.
Henry.
It won't project. You have to speak into the microphone.
Okay. Just speak, Yossi.
I guess that everybody will admit that this sounds more like science fiction than anything else, but it's real. Eventually, in the future, when you have your model, you will want your model to make decisions and to evaluate alternatives. How you are going to embed in the model things like emotions, value system, individual judgment, etc.
So there is a path, and we have to take the path, and we're going to take our inspiration from education, like a child. And we will go through that journey in the same way. We're not going to just throw data at it. Today, what you do is you build an AI model and you throw anything at it, and then it builds correlations and it maps it. That's great. We get enormous power. Look at what we have. It's a revolution. The world's changing just because of that. But we think that you have to go through the developmental stages of how the brain is acquiring. A key step before you get to emotions is reasoning. A key step before reasoning is decision making. So there's a lot of interaction, and then reasoning and decision making starts to become intertwined. So there are many steps that you have to take on this journey, and we think that emotion is something that you do start to address, where you get value. What is the value of wanting to do one thing as opposed to another? Emotion will help decide that. It doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily be, our kind of emotion, but it will be emotion that will allow the digital brain to make decisions and rationalize and set goals.
Right, I have two questions here, Mark, Boris, and then Tom.
Thank you very much. This was a fascinating talk, and congratulations on 20 years of hard work. Now, you mentioned that we are approximately 1/3 of the way towards AGI. Now, we get bombarded with different timelines. When will we reach the end of this path? Every day. What's your assessment?
Well, I think that, we have to solve interaction AI. That is, we will have consultants that are AGI-like very soon, I think. The chat and the LLMs are going to do incredible things, and you're going to have a consultant, but it's going to be a consultant that speaks to you or you speak to it. It's not a consultant that walks out and can interact and won't be able to do things that almost any animal can do. That's the interaction AI. With that AI, we have to understand social interaction. And before that, it comes with reasoning and emotion. So we do still have a long journey to get to full-scale AGI. But now we see the path. We have a playground for people to build digital brains. This is going to trigger a new generation and excitement, and others are going to find faster ways to be able to do that and test it. We have learning rules that are now starting to make sense so that you can start learning these as they come online and we release them. They'll be able to start accelerating this process. It's very difficult to predict the future. But I do think that we have a path. And one guidepost that we use is that today in AI, when you teach one function or one skill after another skill, it gets harder and harder, right? Because they have to learn all the coefficients of all the other functions. So it gets harder and harder and harder. But in your brain, in your child, you teach some basic math, then they can do more advanced math, then they can do calculus, then they can do topology, then they can do all kinds of things. So actually, the natural path of learning, the indicator, if you're on the right path to AGI, is that it needs to get easier and easier. If it doesn't get easier and easier, you're on the wrong path to AGI.
Tom.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, just every time I hear you speak, I'm blown away. So thank you for that experience each time. But secondly, I have a very specific question about if the brain, if intelligence and behavior are heritable, which means that the way in which the cells grow somewhat represents or is related to the cells that grow in the predecessor. How is it that you can use a mathematical model within tolerances to actually create a brain that functions the way the species or that entity ought to function? I mean, for example, will it have a personality disorder? Will there be something wrong with it? I mean, a sociopath can tie their shoes too, but they're still a sociopath, and we call that a disorder. Like, how do you know what kind of brain you're making?
Yes. Yeah. No, it's a very good question. Because we gather data from lots of experiments. I mean, it's literally hundreds of thousands of experiments by neuroscientists all around the world. This is an outcome of the neuroscience community over decades of research. You can think of this as the sort of mean, the average. So it will wash over lots of, quirks and abnormalities which occur in different diseases. So we do think this is more or less the sort of agnostic, we call it mathematic, the null model, the starting model, the foundation. Now, on top of that, you can now come up with a theory and say, in schizophrenia, I think this cell type doesn't work. Let me knock it out. And then you can see how that alters the computations, the information processing, and start to have a much deeper view of what is going on in schizophrenia and how to intervene to be able to restore it back to this sort of mean. So I think it's a good starting point. It's not an end point. It's not this is the beginning of the journey in a way. After 20 years, I feel very excited that we're actually now just beginning. 20 years ago we said, oh, we're beginning. No, we're actually only beginning now because they can get much more detailed, much more precise. Here we've recreated the whole vascular system, all the blood vessels in the brain. These are supporting cells. They look after the neurons. They give them food. They give them oxygen and energy, and they take away carbon dioxide, and they get rid of all the metabolites and the dirt and the garbage. So these all create this ecosystem for the neurons to be able to survive, thrive, communicate, and so on. So there's a lot more to do. And that is also why we created the Open Brain Institute, so that the world can now participate in a collaborative way, increase the number of people that can get engaged with it, have more ideas, and make it more precise. It doesn't mean it's exact. There's still a lot of things that can be improved here. It's really just the beginning.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, Henry. It was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.